Okay, so I wanted to make a casual video. I've got my cup of tea here, and I wanted to talk to you about some of the mistakes I made when I was first starting out quilting. And honestly, some of these mistakes I still make. Now, the idea is to not stress you out. It's just to let you know what they are so you can watch out for them, especially if you're brand new to quilting. If you're new here, my name's Stacey and I release a new video every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I release that as a premiere, which means there's also a live chat that you can join us on and chat with me and all my other friends there. It's a lot of fun and we'd love to see you. But for now, let's talk about the first mistake, and it's the one that I made right before I started quilting, and that was not choosing a nice, easy quilting pattern. So when I first started quilting, I was making lots of garments and lots of things for my kids and just lots of small projects. And I was like, I want to make a quilt, because I was blogging a lot at the time and everyone was making quilts. And I did a blog post and I said, I'm going to make a quilt and I'm just going to make it up as I go. And some kind person on my blog said, please don't. Please use a pattern. It's a lot harder than you think. And there's so many different things to it compared to sewing that you're used to. You need to start off with a pattern. And boy, am I so glad that I took her advice. I ended up doing a stack coined quilt, and if I can find a photo, I'll put it up here of one of my very first quilts. I did one earlier that was just like squares sewn together, but I don't think that one counts. Anyway, so that was the best advice ever. So first off, make sure you've got a really nice simple pattern, but also make sure that it is beginner friendly. And sometimes I do think that people put on their patterns beginner friendly, but it's really not. I would try and choose something super easy and simple to start off with. That is my best advice, because if you start a quilt, I want you to be able to finish it, because that is one of the best confidence boosting things you can do when you start quilting. And of course, I have my free 5-week Learn to Quilt course, and I'll put a link down below. This video was not meant to be a plug for that. It just came to mind when I was talking to you about this, and of course that quilt is very easy. So I'm a big tea drinker. I love Earl Grey tea, and I recently, well actually it's probably 2 years ago, quit sugar completely. And after that I couldn't just drink regular black tea. I now have to have Earl Grey so it doesn't taste so bad without the sugar. But there you go, that's some useless information about me. So my number 2 tip is you need to sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, if you're coming from the sewing world, this is going to be something that's completely new to you. You're probably used to sewing with a 5/8 of a seam allowance. But with quilting, we use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, even for quilters that have made a few quilts, this is something that they really have to work on to make sure they're getting a really nice, accurate 1/4 inch seam. And there's probably one of the most critical things when you are making a quilt is to be sewing a really nice straight stitch, but a really nice straight 1/4 inch stitch. Now, I do have a whole video on this explaining what a 1/4 inch seam is and a scant 1/4 inch seam, but if you're a beginner, you just need to focus on that 1/4 inch seam. And if you're sort of advancing on, a scant 1/4 inch seam is what you're aiming for. And I'll put a link down below for you all about that too. So let's talk about pressing. Now, some people refer to it as ironing, but we say pressing in the quilting world because when we are ironing or pressing, we really are pressing rather than ironing vigorously. Now, a lot of people don't like ironing, but you really do have to embrace it and learn to enjoy it. And to be honest with you, I actually find the pressing really therapeutic, and it's actually one of my favorite parts of quilting. I actually kind of go into a bit of a daze sometimes and just keep pressing, and then you'll notice it sometimes in the videos, is she pressing that a bit much? And I might be, because I've just like dazed off. I just love it because I just love watching the fabric transform, getting beautiful and flat. And the idea with pressing is that we want to press out all those sewn seams so we don't have any creases or divots in there. So we finger press and we press them all out. And if you've watched any of my videos, I talk about this in every single one. Pressing is critical. It also helps with nesting those seams. It just makes your project look a whole lot more professional. And I recommend pressing after every seam that you've sewn. If you don't want to press after every seam, you can get things like a seam roller that can help. But I'm sorry to say that you should really try and make your iron your new best friend, because pressing is critical, and I think it just makes a world of difference in your quilt. I personally love pressing all my fabric before I start. It just looks so much fresher and beautifuler, and I think it's easier to cut accurately and sew together accurately. So pressing, don't think that you can skip that part because it is critical. So now the next one happens to the best of us, and that's using a dull rotary blade cutter. Now we don't usually notice that the blade has gone blunt until we really start to struggle with the cutting. It usually gets hard to cut the fabric. We usually find we're having to go over it more than once. We might notice sort of frayed edges. Well, all those signs mean it's time to change your rotary blade cutter. And trust me, it really does make the world of difference to swap out that blade and use a nice fresh one, because when we're cutting, we really should only have to cut once, and of course that's once and away from you. We're not sawing. If you're sawing, you need a new blade, or perhaps you haven't learned proper techniques on how to cut fabric. And again, I have a video on that, and I'll put a link down below. And I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for this to be a video about me sharing all the videos that I've got on these different things. It just happens that I do have them. So anyway, let's move on to the next mistake. So next up, let's talk about pinning. And now this one's another contentious subject because a lot of quilters, you'll notice, don't pin. But I'm in the pinning camp, and you'll hear in all my videos, pop a pin in, because I love to pop those pins in. Now, if you are a really experienced quilter, you probably don't need to worry about pins, but if you are a beginner, they are critical to getting everything lined up nicely, all those edges lined up nicely, and sewing them how you want them to be sewn together. Only experienced quilters should really ditch the pins and not worry about them. So I personally use pins probably 75% of the time. If I want it to be perfect, I will still use pins, and if I'm in a rush, I'll probably ditch them. But in my videos, I do try to use them because I do think they are best practice. So if you're having trouble with perhaps the pieces not lining up and being sewn together, it might be because you're skipping the pins maybe a little bit earlier than you should be. And I think just treat pins like they're your best friend. They're there to help you, and they're there to make your quilting much easier. So grab those pins and pop them in every chance you get. So my next mistake is sewing too fast, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about, because if you're not happy with how your stitches are turning out, perhaps they're not nice and straight, you're not getting that perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, or things just aren't looking how you want them to look, my number one advice is always to just slow down. I think that you get a much tidier finish if you just slow down. Sewing is not meant to be a race, and I think people think they're just going to hit that pedal and go real fast and finish it. But I would like you to think more about sewing as something that's therapeutic, and you're just following the steps and taking your time and trying to perfect each of the steps. Now, we're not aiming for perfection, but we're just aiming to enjoy it and take our time, which I find equals perfection. So my number one advice, really, no matter what you're sewing, especially those top stitches, is just slow down. Next is not fixing mistakes when you need to. Now, in a lot of my videos, I will stop and say, let's check our points. Let's check we haven't sewn the points off, because that is really a nuisance and a problem, especially if you're trying to get those perfect stars. And what I say is check it. Are you happy with it? Yes, then move on. Are you not happy with it? Can you live with it? And if you can't live with it, then let's unpick those stitches and try again. Now, for anything that you've done with your quilt, if there's any part of it where you're like, oh, I could have done better, it's not quite right, please just unpick those stitches and try again. It really doesn't take long. I call it unpick. Now, it's a seam ripper. I call it a quick unpick. But you know what I'm talking about. It's one of my favorite tools, and honestly, I think the idea of unpicking and doing it again takes longer than just biting the bullet and just getting down to it and fixing it up as you go. Because if there's a problem that's annoying you, it's way bigger to, let's say, make a whole lot of blocks, sew it together, and then be like, oh my gosh, I've literally sewn half the point off that. I really need to unpick it and fix that bit up. Well, it would have been much quicker just to do it right at the time where you saw it. So that's another one of my things. Now, my motto is a finished quilt is a perfect quilt. So we don't need to be absolutely silly about it, but I think you're going to know if something needs to be unpicked or not. So my last point is to not be too hard on yourself. Now, you might think that contradicts the last mistake, but the last mistake was about seeing those mistakes and fixing them at the time when you've got the chance. But what I'm talking about now is when you have finished your quilt, let's just celebrate that you finished a quilt. Don't sit there picking at it, looking at all the mistakes and wishing you did things differently. We're going to celebrate the win that we've finished a quilt, because a finished quilt is a perfect quilt. And then we're going to look at it and admire how far we've come, what we've learnt, and then we're going to make our next quilt. So I just want you to be kind to yourself, enjoy the process, and celebrate every single quilt that you finish, because that's what it's all about. Quilts aren't meant to be perfect. They're meant to be handmade with love by you. So if you've made any of these mistakes or all of them like I have, you're in good company. If any of them stood out to you, let me know which one it was in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And my friend Carolina Moore is doing her take on this video with a different mix of mistakes. If you'd like to check that out, I'm going to put a link up above so you can watch her video. And I just want to thank you for watching this video till the very end. I really appreciate you.